Thank you so much for being with us. On behalf of the Syrian American Forum, المنتدى السوري الأمريكي, I would like to thank you all for attending our event this evening. As you all know, Virginia State Senator Mr. Richard Blake is one of the few brave voices who supported the Syrian people from the very beginning of the war on Syria. So please help me welcome him. Thank you for being with us. Also, I would like to welcome our friends from the Syrian American Forum National Board who came from New Jersey. We have Dr. Ghiyas Musa, we have Ghalib Mahaini, thank you. We have Khalil Matar, and we would like to thank Mr. Nizar Aboud from Al Mayadeen for being with us. Also, I would like to welcome Father Timothy for being with us. Thank you so much. This is a great honor. Honestly, I'm really touched. I'm really honored to have the Senator with us. We really need to do something. We are here because we believe that we can make a difference. To have someone who is brave enough to go to Syria and visit Palmyra, then to come and visit us here, it's really a big event for us. So I would like to thank him again, and I'm going to have Salah Asfoura, the president of the New England chapter.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Senator Black, for being with us today. We in the Syrian American Forum, in the Syrian American community, appreciate you and the stand you have taken on Syria and your support for the Syrian people in their struggle against terrorism and to preserve the unity of their country. Our Syrian American community in New England and all over is dismayed with the ongoing misrepresentation of the situation in Syria. Mr. Black has been most aware of the real situation there since the beginning of the crisis. His visit to Syria represents a breakthrough in the thinking of American politicians. We are sure it took a lot of courage from Mr. Black to travel to Syria, an active war zone, to lay a hand on reality in contrast to what we see in the media. We appreciate the risk you have taken to experience the situation there in person and to find out more about the truth. Please, let's all welcome Mr. Black for his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me just give you a couple words about my background. I'm not some anti-war activist. I fought with the United States Marines in Vietnam. I was wounded attacking communist positions. Both of my radio men were killed right next to me. I also was a pilot. I flew 269 combat missions, came back with bullet holes in the plane 4 times. I will tell you though, while that's a pretty good record in the United States military, it is petty cash relative to the enormous heroism of the Syrian military forces. And I think all of the honor goes to them because I was there for a year fighting, and while it was very fierce combat, they are there year after year after year. And so they deserve great credit. I did not start off with my interest in Syria because of Syria. I have had a long interest in foreign policy that goes back over 50 years. And I was, while I fought in Vietnam as a Marine officer, I was later an Army JAG officer at the Pentagon, and also served in Europe, where I was responsible for legal affairs in North Africa and the Middle East. And so while I did not personally travel, I had a very fine international affairs officer who would give me reports on what was going on in Saudi Arabia and in Egypt and various places. And it was kind of an eye-opener, particularly when it came to Saudi Arabia. That is a different kind of a country. Okay, well let me get started, because what I want to do is to go through the background on the Syrian war, and at the very end some recommendations that I have, and perhaps we can go into a discussion. I apologize that it's a bit long, but it is not only sort of an overview of the war, but a little bit of my trip to Syria, which ended the end of April of this year. A wonderful trip over there. I spent a couple of hours during the trip, actually towards the end of the trip, with President Bashar Al Assad, and one of the most delightful things is that you know, I felt like I had known him, because I do what I call open source intelligence, where I study everything. I mean, propaganda from the left, propaganda from the right. I study things from Syria, from Israel, from Iran, from Russia, from Britain, from the United States, and you synthesize it all and you begin to form a very clear picture. I did this when I had a top secret compartmentalized clearance with the Army, and interestingly, while I'd be briefed on top secret matters, there was never a single thing they briefed me on that I did not know about and understand before I ever got the briefing. So this is very much the same way that I do things with Syria, and it began with an examination of Libya. And when we attacked Libya, I thought, what a strange thing. Libya, you know, we had normalized relations. We'd had some problems with them in the past, but for years, they had become our top ally, our #1 ally in the war on terror in North Africa. And Libya was very successful. It had the highest per capita income of any country in North Africa. And so it intrigued me. Why are we making an attack on a neutral, non-belligerent country, which clearly is a violation of the law of war? And I thought, well, maybe it's about oil. Oil's a little part of it, but I'll get to that. That's not the real reason. But I want to say about President Assad, you know, we always try to, before we oust people and overturn them, we turn them into monsters. We call them bad guys. If you're a bad guy, then you are likely to die. Okay, this is kind of the way it's, you know, it's like an SOP. They've got a book somewhere in the Central Intelligence Agency in the State Department that tells you what to do. I will tell you, I had studied him in 2011, and I had studied his wife. There are numerous YouTube videos where you can listen to him at length. And I was quite impressed because he struck me as intelligent, very soft-spoken, very, very reserved in his language. And when I met him, he was precisely what I had seen years earlier. Very much a gentleman. And then at a certain point, I said, you know, I was so impressed. I had watched the videos of you, and I had watched the videos of your wife. I said, I'm so sorry that I'll be unable to see her. And then as we continued our discussion, Asma al-Assad showed up. I have to tell you, of all the first ladies on earth, she has to be the #1. She is so joyous, she's outgoing, she's happy, but you know, we've become accustomed to thinking of first ladies as somehow being pretentious and pompous and self-centered and so forth. And I've got to tell you, if you ran into her in the grocery store and you dropped something on the floor, she'd be the one to pick it up and say, "How are you today?" She is a delightful lady. I wish I had pictures of her. She's just the finest person. And I would tell you, if she went on television in the United States, nobody in this country would believe that she could be married to a monster that we portray with all of the propaganda. So it was a very, very, very enjoyable, very pleasant meeting with President Assad. And of course, I've had correspondence with him, which shook the whole world. When I wrote to him in 2014, everybody said, "How can you possibly write a letter to a dictator who's done this and that?" I said, look, I said two things. One, thank you for the gallantry of the Syrian army in rescuing all of those people who were enslaved along the Kalaman mountain range. And number two, I said, I cannot explain to you why the United States, that lost 3,000 people in the 9/11 attacks from Al-Qaeda, is now supporting Al-Qaeda and turning them loose to terrorize the people of Syria. And interestingly, I told the people in my office, they panicked at first. They said, "Oh my gosh, all these calls are coming in," and I was out of town the first day. I said, well, put everybody who calls, put them on, and I'll talk to them personally. And I talked to them. There were a few jihadists, honestly. But even they, you know, they realized that I understood exactly what was going on. And most of the people would end up by saying, you know, I really didn't know that that was going on. And by talking to all of these people who obviously had a great passion and interest, all of a sudden it began a thought process that really has reverberated around the world and hopefully will result in success in the end. I want to get something out of the way first of all, because the one thing that you hear blamed on President Assad over and over, he gassed his own people. I will tell you he did not, and I'm going to tell you who did. Turkey, through their covert intelligence agents working with al-Nusra, which is al-Qaeda in Syria, launched the gas attack on the Ghouta suburbs of Damascus. And I could give you an entire discussion on that, but I just want to run through something because I'm very big on timelines. And timelines give you a lot of information. This all occurs in 2013, leading up to the sarin gas attack. And you'll see, this only covers about 2.5 months. This is all happening in rapid succession. May the 30th, there is a raid carried out by Turkish authorities. Now, this is before they had fallen under a total dictatorship. And so there still were some upstanding people in Turkey, and they raided the homes of a dozen al-Qaeda members in Turkey. And they came up with a tremendous amount of evidence about a major undertaking by al-Qaeda to get sarin gas, to move it into Syria, and to unleash it on Syria. And in fact, 2.2 kilograms of sarin gas were in the hands of the al-Qaeda people, and they were found out. Okay, so this is May the 30th. June 20th, three weeks later, the Defense Intelligence issues a report that was disclosed by WikiLeaks. They said al-Nusra has a major sarin production unit. They were not talking about 2.2 kilograms. They were talking about thousands and thousands of pounds. And this is the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is a pretty good outfit. August the 13th. Now this is interesting. This was revealed by Pulitzer Prize winning author Seymour Hersh in his book, The Red Line and the Rat Line. There are others who have written about it. And now Seymour Hersh, if you don't know, he was the guy who disclosed the My Lai massacres in Vietnam. He disclosed the Abu Ghraib misconduct. He's a guy who's broken some of the biggest stories on military foreign policy things that have occurred in recent history. He discusses a meeting that was called by the rebels in Turkey. It was held in Turkey. It was held with the Central Intelligence Agency, with MIT, the Turkish intelligence agency, with the various terrorist groups that we call the moderate rebels. A moderate rebel, I think, is somebody who slices your head off with a moderately sharp knife. That's my definition of a moderate rebel. But anyway, now this is interesting. The rebels gather this meeting, they all come together, and the rebels announce, they said there will be a war-changing development, and it's going to happen almost immediately, and the United States will bomb Syria. The United States will openly attack Syria. Now, the Ghouta attack, the gas attack, occurred on August the 21st. How did they know on August the 13th that the United States was going to bomb Syria? The United States hadn't said anything about bombing Syria or attacking Syria. How did the rebels know? You and I didn't know. How did the terrorists know that the United States was going to bomb Syria on August the 13th? Not only that, but I don't think the rebels were the only people who knew it. I think the intelligence agencies knew it. And there was an agreement entered into that there would be a massive push of high-grade weapons into Syria. The purpose of that was for the final march on Damascus. Now look at this. They've been fighting for 2 years. Who would have imagined that there would be a final march on Damascus? It's impossible without the United States launching an overt attack, an open war on Syria. I love timelines because they give you a lot of insight, and you can see what happens. The rebels knew we were going to go to war before the American people knew we were going to war. That tells you something about how this war is run. And it also tells you that it was not President Assad who launched that gas attack. And I could go into that forever. I'm not going to. But you look at that and you say, okay, that was not him. And remember, this August 13th meeting is held in Turkey. Okay, so it was Turkey and it was al-Nusra that launched the attack. Now let's go back. This is Syria before the war. And of course, many of you know Syria and love Syria. And interesting thing about Syria is that before the war began, President Assad, Bashar Al Assad, had taken over. He had the reputation as a reformer. He was going to further increase citizen participation. He was going to root out corruption. And he made a really fine start on doing all of the things that he had planned. He was very excited. He and his wife, they just were excited about the opportunity to make Syria a great nation. At that time, Syria had the greatest women's rights and the greatest religious freedom of any nation in the Arab world. And we're always talking about, oh, you know, we're going to spread democracy, we're going to do this. Baloney. Baloney. absolutely no truth to it. And so we took a country that was at peace. I have been told that Syria was ranked among the 5 safest nations on earth. Okay, I see a lot of heads nodding. And you think of the 5 safest nations. Switzerland, places like this, incredible. Just incredible. So it was a wonderful country. And now, the next thing that happens is the Syrian war countdown. Now, again, I love timelines because they tell you so much about the truth. 2011, remember, 2011 is when the war broke out. So where do I start my countdown? In 2001. 2001. In 2001, the Pentagon was ordered to begin planning to topple the government of Syria. Now, this is unquestioned. You can easily go on Google and you can look up General Wesley Clark, who was the Supreme Allied Commander, NATO, which is the top U.S. general outside of the Pentagon. And he openly says, after 9/11, he said, I saw the Secretary of Defense, and then I went down to the war room, and I talked with one of the generals there, and in a couple of conversations, the general told him, he says, this is amazing. He said, we've got orders down from up above, talking about the Secretary of Defense, we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years. These are neutral, non-belligerent countries, clearly a war of aggression, illegal under the laws of war, and it is absolutely documented, unquestioned. You can't question General Wesley Clark on that particular issue. Okay, so that takes place. Now the next thing that comes up, in 2006, the U.S. Embassy issues a communique, and the communique goes to the White House, and it goes to all through the government. And it is a detailed plan to overthrow Syria. Now again, Syria's at peace. It's not at war with anybody. It's had 40 years of peace with Israel on the Golan Heights. President Assad had withdrawn Syrian troops who had long been stationed in Lebanon. And it's a very sinister communique. It was released by WikiLeaks, so you can see the actual communique. It's very reliable. The 2 things that really stand out to me is, one, they said, President Assad has come in as a great reformer, and as a result, there is such confidence in him. Now, these are my words. They couch it in a little different, little more cynical language. But basically what they were saying is he has been so successful at bringing direct foreign investment into Syria that the Syrian economy is doing well and the people are excited about what's happening. We've got to undercut that. We've got to somehow smear the image of Syria so that we can destabilize the government, which is the objective. The other thing that really is deeply troubling is they talked about the need to create religious divisions. And many of you know far better than I that Syria, a part of the Syrian culture, has been this unique tapestry of religious harmony where people of very divergent religious faiths have gotten along, for centuries. And not perfect, but considering the Middle East, it's extraordinary. And the idea that the United States Embassy is saying we need to shatter that sense of love and cohesion among the people and create religious frictions. Very, very shameful on the part of the embassy. Okay, now, Hillary Clinton has become the Secretary of State. I think it was 2009. We're ready. We're ready to implement. The Libyan uprising which was inspired by the Central Intelligence Agency, MI6, and French intelligence. They convinced Omar Gaddafi or Colonel Gaddafi to release the most dangerous al-Qaeda prisoners as a show of good faith. When he did that, because he would do virtually anything he was asked, they immediately used those people in Benghazi to instigate an uprising. And the typical way that it's done, it was done in Libya, it's been done in Syria, is you get demonstrators going, and then you have snipers. And the snipers kill a demonstrator. And then the snipers kill a police officer. And then a demonstrator, and then a police officer. And before long, the police think the demonstrators are opening fire on them, and vice versa. And everybody shoots, and before long, you create a revolution out of an ordinary demonstration. Imagine in this country if you had a group that were protesting against the availability of guns, or a group that was protesting in favor of the Second Amendment and saying that guns should be available. And they're out there. They're not trying to topple the government, but what they're trying to do is make a change. And imagine then if someone put a sniper up and all of a sudden started killing police and killing the demonstrators, what effect it would have. Well, this is the effect it had in Libya. So again, I'm wondering, why are we after Libya? Was it the oil? No, it wasn't. There's not enough to make it worth doing all of this. What it was is that we were ready for the Syrian war to break out. We knew that with the tremendous strength and stability, the popularity of President Assad, the strength of the army, that it was going to take an enormous military force to topple this country. You couldn't very well have the CIA and the State Department go to the Appropriations Committee and say, look, we got this country, and it's one of the 5 safest countries on earth. It's got the best women's rights, the best religious freedom of any Arab country. It's friendly towards the United States. We must destroy them, tear them limb from limb. Please give us appropriations so that we can buy weapons. And we want to hire, by the way, we want to hire Al-Qaeda, which attacked the Twin Towers, to do it. Well, that would have been a rough sell. That would have been a real tough sell. But they worked around it. What they did is they orchestrated the Libyan uprising because Colonel Gaddafi had an enormous arsenal of high-grade, modern military weapons. We said, we're going to set up a no-fly zone, and as soon as we did, we bombed that country into the Stone Age. They don't even have a government in Libya today. At one point, the so-called government had to meet on a ship offshore because they couldn't control a 10-acre square of the country, and we call it, oh, this is a government. So we utterly destroyed Libya, and even before Colonel Gaddafi was murdered, and he was murdered, they turned over an airfield in Libya to the Turks, and the Qataris began sending planes and shipping weapons into Turkey to be used in Syria. Okay, what are the causes of the war in Syria? What sort of lies at the heart of it? The media tells us it's a domestic uprising, that people just got upset with Bashar Al Assad. They thought he was a tyrant, and also he gassed his own people. Well, we know he didn't gas his own people, okay? And I don't think that any of you have heard from any large number of people that he was really viewed as a tyrant. I got to tell you, you meet this guy and you say, this guy ain't a tyrant. I mean, this is not the kind of guy that you can paint very easily as a tyrant. if you meet him, if he's allowed to speak to the American people, the American press. You just couldn't sell it. So, no, it was not a domestic uprising at all. But there were two things at work. And one was there was a very serious dispute over oil and gas pipelines, particularly gas pipelines. The other thing, and this is very troubling and I think threatening to the entire world, the whole civilized world, was the weaponization of religion. We had started this under President Ronald Reagan, whom I love dearly and have great respect for, but he made a mistake when he organized Al-Qaeda to bring down the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. They were called the Mujahideen. And they have metastasized, and they have spread, and you know, they brought down the Twin Towers, and they've done all of these other things. And it is the fact that we have backed the Saudi Arabians in promoting this most vile and despicable type of Islam called Wahhabism. And it's the Wahhabism that's being spread around the world that is causing terrorism everywhere. Now, just quickly on the pipelines, there were two competing pipelines, and actually the timeline on this, while it's a little bit vague, it will give you some insight. Qatar, which is essentially a bunch of barren sand dunes with gas wells. I mean, there is. I was in Qatar, and I asked the driver. I said, "Take us to the old part of Qatar." He says, "There is no old part of Qatar. There's nothing." So basically, huge sand dunes. I mean, Qatar is. I mean, and I don't mean to be too critical of the country. If it were not for the politics, you wouldn't hear me say this. But it is nothing but sand and gas wells. Well, Qatar approached President Assad and they said, look, we want to run a gas pipeline through Saudi Arabia, through Turkey, or through Syria into Turkey, and we want to supply gas to the European market. Very big deal, because that's 99.9% of their gross national product is gas. Right now it's provided to Asia, but they wanted to provide it to Europe. And so they went to Assad. He said, no, I can't do that. I've got close relations with the Russians, who have supported us on many things, and with Gazprom, which has helped us with the development of our oil and gas. They did not like that. That's 2009. Iran then came in 2011 and said, look, we want to run a pipeline. Now, these arrows are not precise. They just give you the general idea. There's actually the Pars gas field that lies in the Persian Gulf between Iran and Qatar. They both draw gas from it. And so Iran came in and said, look, we'd like to do a pipeline from Iran through Iraq into Syria. Actually, it should be shown as going through Lebanon. And then perhaps they would do liquefied natural gas and export it from there. This was a huge problem for the Qataris and the Saudis, because they wanted the enormous wealth that would flow from this. And this is big, big money. This is not petty cash. It's enormous. So this was a triggering event. I think maybe to a certain extent it was the last straw for the Saudis and the Qataris that made them decide, okay, we're going to use our terrorist weapon and overthrow Syria. Now, hopefully, I think in my bag, I think I've got some references that I can give to you. One of them is an excellent article by Seymour Hersh. It's called "The Red Line and the Rat Line." And the red line, of course, was President Obama's threat: if you use poison gas, we will go to war with you. The other thing was the rat line, which was the weapons line, which I've described for you briefly. This just shows it. Basically, the arms flowing. Qatar flew the aircraft into Libya, picked up captured Libyan weapons. The Libyan weapons were transported into Turkey, and from Turkey they were driven across the border into Syria, along with the jihadists to operate them. There were Syrians involved in this. There were some traitors. There were some people who were bought off, but the principal impetus throughout this war has been foreign jihadists. It has not been Saudi Arabians. Now, I told you about this tapestry, this religious harmony. I went to the city of Homs, and the governor of Homs province, the biggest governor or the biggest province in Syria, took me around, and in the evening he said, we're going to go to a choral presentation if you like. I said, oh, that'll be fine. I said, let's do that. And so we came in, and it was sort of dimly lighted. We were late. I was a little awkward, this is a big theater. And so the governor said, well, would you like to say a few words to the people? I said, yes, that'd be fine. So I went up a little bit awkward about the fact that I was interrupting their presentation. I told them how much I wanted to bring peace to Syria and so forth. And then I sat down with the crowd, and there was a very charismatic woman who was singing in Arabic, and I'm not an Arabic speaker. And so my eyes were sort of glued on her, just watching her and listening to her very beautiful voice. And then gradually my eyes drifted to the orchestra, and then to the choral group in the back. And all of a sudden, I was struck. Here is a full screen sized image of Jesus Christ, crown of thorns, laboring under the cross, clearly on his way to crucifixion at Calvary. And I leaned over to the wife of the Homs governor, who is Muslim, and I said, is this a religious or a Christian theater? She said, oh no. She said, this is a public theater. We do all sorts of presentations here. I said, in the United States, you probably would not be seeing this. Father, you understand what I'm saying? And she said, there are lots of Muslims in the audience here. And she said, the choral group includes a great number of Muslims, and they're singing about the crucifixion, the death of Christ and the arisen Christ. And again, it's this thing that Americans really cannot quite fathom, this religious harmony, this ability to get along together. And here she is, and here is Christ on the cross. This is in Homs, which is easily 80% Muslim. And I ran into this over and over again. It was just an amazing thing, which is part of the beauty of the culture of Syria. And one of the great tragedies is that we have seen fit, the United States has seen fit to rip this to shreds and to create religious hatreds. Now, we went out to Palmyra, and the Syrian army had an enormous victory over ISIS in Palmyra. Amen. It was such a heroic. I've got to tell you, I wish you could see the perspective. I'm up there with the generals who led the attack, and you can't tell from the perspective, but we're on a ridge line that goes down at a 45-degree angle, and it's all loose rubble. Just tremendous, the idea of attacking up that. And they showed me how they attacked from 3 different directions. And then they showed me something that stuck out in my mind. The deputy commanding general, at the heights, the highest point is the Palmyra Castle, which is beautiful, and they were not able to destroy it. So it will be restored, and it'll have its former glory, which is wonderful. It's a gift to humanity. But the deputy commanding general, a Syrian general, died at the foot of the fortress trying to capture it. And I wonder today, in today's military, the new modern liberalized military in the United States, how many general officers would lead the attack up a 45-degree angle and personally go to the foot of that fortress and look up and face the guns? Very few. And we had a little fun. We went out, the Syrian Air Force was able to occupy a very large airfield, and we were driving along there, and we saw a couple of little F-5 aircraft that not too much, and I said, let's drive over to the revetment. I said, I want to see what's in there. So we drove over, and this is where they keep the real stuff. And this is a huge attack jet. It's a MiG aircraft, and that's the pilot up there, and very, very fine air crew and pilots. And I mean, you know, I count my missions. I had 269. These guys, they don't even bother to count. They don't even bother to count. They just fly and fly and fly. And then we went out, we examined the ruins of Palmyra. And when Jesus Christ walked the earth, there already were 2,000 years of civilizations built one upon the other, ancient temples. And so in all, you had 4,000 years of history. It was a priceless gem. It was a UNESCO World Heritage Site. People came from all over the world to see it. When ISIS came in, they vandalized it. And they blew down things, and they destroyed things, and they shipped antiquities off. Guess where they shipped them? Turkey. Our good ally, Turkey, took all of these antiquities that should be viewed by people 10,000 years from now, and they're pawning them off on the open market. I did a press conference there. We had press following us all over the place, and essentially I was saying, and I think this captures it, where was the American coalition? We had this enormous force of aircraft. I don't know how many countries, what are there, 20, 30, 40, I don't know how many we count in the coalition. When ISIS attacked Palmyra, and we knew this was a heritage site, and we knew how precious it was, somehow they have vision problems in the CIA and the State Department, and they could not see hundreds and hundreds of tanks and thousands of trucks and hundreds of artillery pieces and armored cars and things in the wide open desert. Somehow they just missed it. Well, they didn't miss it. They saw ISIS as a tool that they could use, and they knew that Palmyra was one step closer to Damascus, and they were quite happy to have ISIS be the force that entered and conquered Damascus and slaughtered everybody. And so it just outraged me, and I didn't bring other slides, but I could show you the terrible destruction that took place. It was a great tragedy, not just for our generation, but for 100 generations to come, that the United States stood by and allowed this to happen deliberately. Now, just a few words about the war, and this slide is perhaps the most instructive. If you look at the orange plus the tan areas, with the exception of Aleppo and up there, that's the big population centers of Syria. And the orange parts are the parts that are governed and controlled by the government. Probably 75–80% of the population of Syria. From everything that I can tell, not just from my visit, but I happen to have had two women who were traveling there incognito, and they reported the people are absolutely happy with President Assad. They're absolutely happy with their government. And so the vast bulk of the people stand beside him. You think about it. This war's been going on for 5 years. There's not been one attempt on President Assad's life, and not one single rebel leader has emerged as a popular figure with the Syrian people. Isn't that amazing? In Nazi Germany, people were, there was tremendous support for Adolf Hitler. There were 6 or 8 serious attempts on his life. I met the cousin of one of the fellows who actually did the bomb that almost killed Hitler. So you had all of those attempts. The Syrian people have not tried to assassinate President Assad. And so you have to ask, well, why? Well, you have to have a certain amount of popularity. If you are really disliked by your people are going to find a way to do something about it. Now, okay, so the bright orange is the part that's controlled by the government. The part around Idlib is a pocket that's formed by Al-Qaeda, which, Al-Nusra, Arar al-Sham, all of these groups, but they are Al-Qaeda or Al-Qaeda allies. And now that tan part has shrunken. The Syrian army has managed to squeeze it. Up around Aleppo, what I really want to show you, if you can see the part with the dotted outline and the great ISIS arrow pointing down. Okay, it's right next to Kobani. Now you all remember the Battle of Kobani. The Kurds were there. ISIS was on a sweep. They were rolling over the Kurds, and the Kurds made a final stand in Kobani. And lo and behold, to everybody's surprise, they held out. And they couldn't be defeated. And they fought, and they fought, and finally it became a political embarrassment to the administration, and they said, all right, let's give them a little bit of help. So we did some bombing campaigns, and at a certain point, once DOD had some discretion, DOD, frankly, there's a lot of Syrian sympathy in the Department of Defense, not in the State Department. We have a split government on this. But once DOD had the wherewithal, the next thing, they parachuted supplies into the Kurds. Anyway, the Kurds were able to win a great victory at Kobani, and much to everyone's surprise, they didn't stop there, but they rolled on. And the areas you see in green are controlled by the Kurds right now, and they actually have expanded beyond this. This is slightly dated, but what they were doing is they were choking off the Turkish routes of supply for ISIS. Every bullet, every canister of poison gas, every artillery shell, every tank, every truck that comes in to the terrorist comes from Turkey with the approval, the highest level approval of the government. I have spoken to witnesses who watched at the major highways leading into Turkey, and I was told they are running hundreds of oil tankers across the border right past the guards. And I asked the question, I said, hundreds in what period of time? And I was told, hundreds every single day. At the height of this, 44,000 barrels of oil stolen from Syria were being run across the border and sold by Turkey. So Turkey dealt in stolen oil, in stolen antiquities, and most disgustingly of all, when they seized Mosul over in Iraq, they seized modern hospitals, and they ordered the doctors to take Christian and Yazidi children, strap them down on the operating table, and with the children still alive, cut them open and harvest their live organs while the children were still alive, and then pack the organs in ice, ship them off where they went to Turkey and to Saudi Arabia for sale on the open market. Those are our allies. With allies like those, I tell you what, you don't need enemies. But this is, Turkey has essentially become a kleptocracy and a very disgusting one. So these are the things that Turkey was doing. Now, Turkey did not want to become part of the coalition because they are the #1 ally of ISIS, and they have been from the beginning. But they saw that they were being choked off by the Kurds, and so they came to the United States. They said, look, we'll cut a deal with you. We are going to join the coalition. However, you have to allow us to bomb in this area that you see in gray. Now, the gray is all ISIS. Okay, Raqqa is the capital city of ISIS, and you can see the area that they're looking at. We agreed, and immediately Turkey launched 300 airstrikes. Their eyesight is not very good, okay? And they happened to hit the Kurds with 297 out of 300 airstrikes. Wow, what great allies against ISIS they are. Basically what they were doing is they were keeping open their supply lines to ISIS because they make a lot of money from ISIS and they make a lot of trouble with ISIS. Okay, I'm going to run quickly through some of the latest things happening in the war. There is a huge battle brewing over Aleppo. It's not the first time, but the 4th Mechanized Division of the Syrian army has moved in. There are reinforcements coming out of Hezbollah moving in. And what happened, there were two things that the Syrian army did very effectively. One is if you could see the arrow where they went in and they relieved the Kuwaris air base. It had been under siege for 2 years, and you know, somehow the media thinks that all the sieges are Syrian, that only the Syrian army has sieges. And somehow they overlook places like the Kuwaris air base, places like Deir al-Azor, which is a very large city that's been under siege for many years, and also the Shiite area of Nubal and Zahara. I'm probably not pronouncing it right. You have to bear with me when I pronounce Syrian names. But the Shiites were up in this pocket. They were being besieged, and the Syrian army first relieved the siege of Kuwaris. They hooked to the left, and they took that entire area away from Al-Qaeda, and they threatened Al-Bab, which is up at the top, which is an important communications center. They also hooked over and they connected up with the Shiites in Nubal and Zahara, and they managed to choke off the supply lines coming out of Turkey to Aleppo. Now, Turkey responded by increasing their supplies coming through Latakia province, and you can see the big arrow, the big Al-Qaeda arrow, and they have forced back the Syrian army in this area here. So the struggle goes back and forth. I mean, this is a huge undertaking, and only God knows the exact direction it will take. This is that area that I showed you that Turkey keeps open as a way of getting their supplies back and forth with ISIS. And the interesting thing, there are two communication centers in it. You can see where all of the roads meet in these two towns. One is Al-Bab, the other is Manjib. The United States has recently organized the Kurds with a handful of Arabs and has pretty much surrounded Manjib, and they are choking that off. Al-Bab is not nearly as effective because it is constantly under threat by the Syrian army. So this Kobani Gap is beginning to be strangled by U.S. forces and also to some extent by the Syrian forces. On the final day of my visit over there, I met with Ambassador Bashar al-Jafari. I want to tell you something about this man because he is one of the great heroes of Syrian history. There are certain things that we do when we topple countries. We did it in Libya, we did it in Syria. The first thing is we tell the terrorists, okay, adopt the old flag before the new government. We did it in Libya, we did it in Syria. Same exact thing. What a coincidence. The other thing that we do is we send in intelligence operatives and we buy off the ambassadors to the United Nations so that they will turn on their own countries. We did it successfully with Libya. And then they went and they essentially gave a blank check to this man that you see here, the UN ambassador to Syria, and he said no. He said, money is not, I am not for sale. I will not sell the blood of the Syrian people. The final thing that I want to talk about before we go over to questions and answers is steps to end the war. A lot is going to depend on the next elections. I'm going to tell you, Hillary Clinton was instrumental in starting the war against Libya and the war against Syria, instrumental in weaponizing religion, and every filthy thing that has happened. Now, I'm not saying this as a partisan, because I could say things about George Bush that Bush supporters would not be fond to hear. My concern is with Syria, and it's with ending this war. If we were to get a president who was receptive to the idea of peace, here are the steps that I would recommend immediately. Number one is to end the U.S. sanctions. We literally have sanctions that prevent them from getting prosthetic devices for amputees and cancer medications for civilians who are dying of cancer, and we say, no way. We cut off medicine, we cut off food, we cut off everything. And it's unlawful, but we do it. The next thing is we need to close U.S. terror training camps. You might be surprised to know that we have been training terrorists in Jordan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey for years. I think we started somewhere around 2012, and we say, oh, these are moderate rebels. Well, once they're trained, they go into the market. They go into the open market, and a large percentage of the ISIS soldiers have been trained in U.S. training camps. A large percentage of the Al-Qaeda trained in U.S. training camps. We need to close those down. The other thing is we need to halt U.S. weapons to terrorists. When Russia moved in to rescue Syria at a very desperate time, had we not rushed in with anti-tank missiles, Syria would be at peace today. But we sent in anti-tank missiles. We sent them to the moderate rebels like Arar al-Sham, which just carried out a massacre where they slaughtered women, captured women, and they burned alive their children. They hung them up and burned them alive. They're not terrorists. John Kerry tells us they're not terrorists. I don't know what the definition of terrorist is. If you can hang up a child and you can burn them alive, what is a terrorist? I don't know. Okay, we need to halt weapons going to terrorists. We need to reopen the Syrian embassy. We closed it in 2014. Timelines. I'm always watching timelines. What else happened in 2014? President Assad conducted a full and fair election, as fair as you're ever going to get in wartime. He was elected with 89% of the vote, and 3/4 of the electorate turned out. It was a massive, massive vote for him. There were two other respected individuals who ran, and but we closed the embassy. Why did we close the embassy? Because we knew that if Syrian Americans in the United States were permitted to vote, they would vote overwhelmingly for President Al Assad, which would be an enormous black eye for the U.S. State Department. Were I advising the President of the United States, I would prepare an executive order that would forbid the CIA and the State Department from taking any actions against Syria, and I would forbid aid of any sort to the rebels. I don't care how moderate they are, how dull their knives are, how few children they hang up and burn alive. No aid, no diplomatic aid. I would make it so explicit, and then I would call in the top leadership, and I'm going to tell you what, I would take a mallet and I would smash the table for emphasis, and they would know that I was dead serious about it. We need peace. We don't even talk about peace anymore. This is the first war we have ever fought in American history where we don't even speak about eventually reaching peace. We talk about the long war, get ready for a long war, forever. And I'm sick of it, I'm tired of it, and I want to do everything I can to end it. And so with that, I'm going to end my presentation and open it up to questions. We'll accept very brief comments. Please, if you make a comment, if you could keep it like a one-sentence comment so that we can focus on questions.
Thank you so much, Senator Black. Thank you so much.
Recently, there was a document that was declassified attributed to Hillary Clinton in which it said we have to destroy Syria to provide more security to Israel. I hope you would make a comment on this document as regarding its veracity or truthfulness.
I must say I'm not familiar with that particular document. I would have to see the document, but I'd be interested in the link to it, so perhaps you could send that to me.
Thank you, Mr. Senator Black, for coming and changing your views with us. We're very happy that we have someone, will hear our views and things, and I think we call you like a hero. As far as the end of the war, how's the U.S. you think will shift her policy from now on with the new elections and stuff? Thank you very much.
Okay, I really think so much will depend on the outcome of the presidential elections. You need to realize that Hillary Clinton was instrumental in kicking off all of these wars. I mean, literally, she has lit flame to the entire Middle East. She has created hatreds in places where people cooperated, and it has been a campaign of enormous hatred. And I'm going to tell you, listen, if you ask me, are you saying this because she's a Democrat? I won't tell you what I think about John McCain because I don't use profanity, okay? But I do not have a high opinion of him. So, but I will tell you, she would be the greatest disaster to world peace that you can imagine. We will deal with that depending on what happens. I mean, if it happens, I think we need to keep working and keep doing the best that we can in building pressure towards peace. But I do know that Donald Trump, for all of the issues, I mean, there's issues that I very much disagree with him on, but he is very good on the Syrian issue. He's made it clear, for one thing, that he is not out to create some needless conflict with the Russians. And I recall the comment where he said, hey, if the Russians want to bomb the terrorists, let them do it. Well, I agree. And I think we ought to be coordinating with the permission of the Syrian government, the legitimate Syrian government, and work together with the Russians, cut off any access that ISIS has, and then we need to seal the border along Latakia so that we don't have Al-Qaeda coming across there, because they're all the same. I mean, it's sort of like two drug cartels, and they're competing, but they all have the same objective. They all intend to slaughter the Christians, the Alawites, the Shiites, the Druze, the moderate Sunnis, and to impose Wahhabism and take the nation back to the Dark Ages. So yes, the elections will be important. Something else, I will touch on this. I've been asked about the Brexit, Britain's exit from the EU. The EU has been very supportive of the war against Syria. And the fact that they have suffered an enormous setback, and it may be the beginning of a cascading effect, I think is a positive thing. For one thing, Great Britain was one of the principal instigators of the war against Libya and Syria, and they are going to have to focus internally to figure out where they're going from here. That's going to keep them tied up for the next 5 years. And so that, I think, is a very positive thing. It also is going to take away the strongest voice against Russia. And Russia, of course, has been working very hard to bring peace in Syria because they have suffered in Chechnya. They understand what terrorism is all about. And so they don't want it to spread back to Russia. So the election is important, Brexit is important, but it is important that Syrian Americans across the globe remain united around President Assad. Now, one thing I want to mention to you, in 2013, the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Pentagon became so deeply concerned about the strategic implications of a possible collapse of Syria that they tasked the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is a straight-up organization, and they said, do an exhaustive study of Syria and render specific findings of fact. They came back and they rendered 3 findings. Number 1, President Assad must not go, for if he does, Syria will collapse in chaos just as Libya did. Number 2, they said that Turkey is a major problem because of their tremendous support for ISIS. Turkey is a problem. And I don't have my slides, so I'm, I'm losing track of what I'm doing. The most important one, the most important of all, is number 3, they said, there are no moderate rebels. They do not exist. Think about this. Secretary Kerry, Secretary of State, is going around saying, oh, we're going to do this for the moderates, that for the moderates. The Defense Intelligence Agency has rendered explicit findings that they do not exist.
My name is Clarette Carl, and I'd like to thank those members of your organization who have invited us from the Schiller Institute here today. And I'd like to thank you, Senator Black. I've heard you speak on many occasions, the most recent, April 7th, on the Schiller Institute program in New York City. And every time that I do hear your presentation, I'm almost ashamed to say I'm an American, especially with the regime's policy for their regime change policy, I should say. And I think that that is something that every American must oppose, is a regime change policy of this administration, and to do as much as possible to bring not just peace and development to Syria, but to all people. And I'd like to know if you are familiar with the Schiller Institute reconstruction plan for Syria, which was drawn up by Schiller Institute members and refugees of Syria in Stockholm, Sweden. It was presented in Syria in October of last year. And just a day ago, a representative of the Syrian Republic spoke at our international conference in Berlin. And we presented this program there also. So I'd like to know if you're familiar with that, and I'd like to ask all of you to become familiar with that policy, because that's what we have to fight for, is development. Aleppo is the crossroads of the old ancient Silk Road, and we have to rebuild that policy.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, let me say the Schiller Institute is doing enormously good work for Syria. Jeff Steinberg, who you know very well, he and I meet for wine and cheese about once a month, and we keep it very small. There are 4 or 5 of us that gather together, and we talk about Syria, and we do whatever we can to plan the next thing that can possibly be done to end the war and bring the peace and restore prosperity. I do know that the Schiller Institute has done extensive work on the rebuilding. They're looking ahead to the end of the war and to the rebuilding. It's going to be a tremendous effort, but what we need to do, we need to get Syrians to go back to Syria and to rebuild this country. There's nobody is more industrious than the Syrian people. And so I applaud you very much. I can't rattle off the details, but I'm most aware of the fact that you've done great work on that, and thank you very much on behalf of all of the Syrian people who love the nation, and on behalf of people like me who are their deepest allies. Thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dark, for this insightful and in-depth presentation about the situation in the Middle East. One thing is missing in all this picture. You mentioned Turkey, you mentioned Saudi Arabia, you mentioned Qatar, of course, all the regional powers, but Israel, where is the role of Israel? Recently, Israelis said they won't be disgruntled if ISIS controlled Syria or not. And they are not discontent about ISIS. Also, we see in the Golan, in the Syrian-occupied Golan, that the Nusra Front and other terrorist groups use the area, the separation area, to cross in, to get medication, to get weapons, and come back trained and well prepared to continue the fight. Israel looks like a major player here, especially in the southern eastern front. How do you qualify the relation between Israel, and there is something ambiguous here about the relation between, the ties between Israel and Russia, as well as America. In the north, we have the Kurds supported by both sides, and in the south, we have some kind of harmony between Israel and other major players.
Thank you. It's an interesting thing that's going on with Israel. Those who support Israel think that they automatically have to support Bibi Netanyahu. Now, people who love the United States don't necessarily believe that they have to love President Obama or President Bush, but for some reason you have to love Bibi Netanyahu. A couple of things that I'll point out, and I'm not going to go too deeply into this, but it is true. We know that Israel has, under Netanyahu, they have provided major resources to the terrorist forces, medical, rehabilitation. They send people back into battle. I think the good news that I can give you is that there are general officers in the Israeli army who believe that this policy of supporting ISIS and Al-Qaeda is extraordinarily reckless for Israel, that it's extraordinarily threatening. And in one of the handouts that I will give you, it is another article by Seymour Hersh, and it's called Military to Military, and it is the most fascinating article because it talks about the conflict between the Department of Defense and the Department of State. And one of the things that they did after it was determined that based on DIA intelligence, they really needed to support President Assad, they actually took action and did it. And what they did is they supplied President Assad with top-level American intelligence and operational directives, and they couldn't do it legally by doing it directly, so they did it military to military, which is the reason for the title of the article. And it was interesting to me that what they would do is they would give it to generals that they knew had contacts in Syria so that they didn't have to do it directly. And they did it through Russian generals, through German generals, and through Israeli generals. There are many members of the Israeli military, the high command, who do not think that the policies being followed by Bibi Netanyahu are in the best interest of Israel or the entire Middle East. So I think that is encouraging, and I hope and pray that there will be some improvement in things in Israel, that they may begin to rethink. I do know that Russia has made contacts with Israel. I can't tell you or even speculate in an intelligent way on what those talks might amount to. I don't have any intelligence on that.
Recently, the Arab League has classified Hezbollah a terrorist organization, and Hezbollah fighting ISIS side by side with Syrian army, Russian, and the U.S. Army, which is Air Force. So, what's your opinion in this situation?
Well, it's very interesting. Hezbollah is a political party in Lebanon. When I came back from Syria, I was surprised. I had made a point, not because I have anything against Hezbollah, but because I did not want to do what John McCain did and come back and have people say, oh, he was photographed with terrorists. And of course, they are on the terrorist watch list. So I made a point. I said, look, I hate to do this, but I can't be photographed with anybody who is on the State Department terrorist watch list. And I said, it's not anything personal against them. I said, it's just one of these political things. If you look at Hezbollah, well, when I came back, there was a newspaper that had said, oh, Senator Black meets with officials with close ties to Hezbollah. I thought, who are they talking about? Well, they're talking about General Aoun, who is likely to be the next president of Lebanon. The way they do it in Lebanon is the president is a Christian, the prime minister is a Sunni, and the speaker is a Shiite. Well, so Hezbollah is not just some terrorist organization. It is a political party with quite a number of seats in the parliament. And so if you're ever going to have a government, you got to deal with Hezbollah. I mean, it's just insane. You know, and it just shows how deceitful the media can be to say that because General Aoun has to deal with the rest of the parliament if he's ever going to be elected, that somehow I'm, connected. But anyway, let me say, I find it interesting. The United States repeatedly says Iran is the greatest instigator of global terrorism. You've seen this over and over and over again. And you really should ask people, when is the last time that a Shiite Muslim committed an act of terrorism? Can you think of one? Maybe if you go back 30 years, you might find something that you could classify. They'll go back to the Marine barracks in Lebanon. But I think a strong argument can be made. I'm a Marine in my heart. I love the Marines. I hate to see them hurt. But people fight for their own country. And they fight foreigners who come into their own country. And so I don't find that to be a compelling example. And so I want to know, okay, where are the examples? Was it Iran or Hezbollah or the Shiites who did Brussels or did Paris or did Boston or did Fort Hood or did San Bernardino or 50 other places that you can name? No. They all emanated or were planned. 9/11 was planned, and there are increasing links between the Saudi government, not just Saudi citizens, but the Saudi government and the attacks on 9/11. And people are beginning to wake up and say, hey, wait a minute. You're saying we're allied with people who were involved in that attack? And there's very credible evidence on that. So You know, in the scheme of things, you know, if I had to make a list of terrorist organizations, I think I'd run off the page before I'd ever get to Hezbollah.
Senator, how do you explain the one-sidedness of the American media, the lack of diversity of opinion in the American media?
Well, that's a good question, and I'm going to answer it only in part. It's interesting, they used to talk about Fox News and how Fox News was this conservative station. It has changed, and while it's Republican in its leanings, it is part of the neocon agenda, just like CNN, just like MSNBC. The State Department and the Central Intelligence Agency command enormous influence over the broadcast media. They command a good deal of influence over talk radio. Although I believe it was, I can get the date for anybody who's interested. There may be some listeners to Rush Limbaugh. It was on the 25th of August, I think, 2014. You know, he never, part of his shtick is he never admits being wrong to anything. And he admitted, he came out and he said, well, he said, it looks like we were wrong. He said, it looks like President Assad did not attack his cities with gas. It looks like it was, I think he used the word ISIS that did it. And but even there, it was a one-shot thing, and then he doesn't talk about it anymore. I think there's enormous financial pressure. I think threats are made behind the scenes. You can go on the internet. If you look up, if you Google, or if you go to Bing, which is even better, and you get out of the Google censorship, and you say, evidence that the US supports Al-Qaeda, you're going to come up with a ton of stuff, some of which I have written. Some of it that comes from WikiLeaks, from all over the place. And you can ask any question like that, and you'll come up with tons of information. But it's very sad. The broadcast media have linked arms, and they simply will not speak a word of truth about Syria. I wish it were different. It's just something that we deal with. And I think through our channels, we get out information as much as we possibly can.
I don't know, maybe my comment is a little bit naive. I'm listening to what it is, you know, that you're saying. The Wahhabism has been all over the news for the last maybe like a couple of years. The fact also, you know, that the US is supporting Al-Qaeda. So as I'm listening to what you're saying, and I listen also, you know, to some people whenever I ask them the question about whether they really, you know, love the Saudis, most of the Americans don't really, you know, love what the Saudi Arabia, you know, is all about. So the question is the following. Is there any link to perhaps, you know, all of those incognito kind of operations of buying of the treasuries? Because, you know, the gas is gas, whether it comes through Iran or whether it comes through Qatar. So for the administration, the American administration, why are they taking a stand whereby history is going to look at us and saying, you know, we are supporting actually the people who are non-democratic, and we are supporting the Wahhabis. So it doesn't jive, and that's why I wanted, you know, to have an opinion.
Well, I guess so much depends on who writes the history, and I will be very surprised if they write an accurate history about Saudi Arabia. one of the conclusions I've come to is that if you want to be an absolute despot and a tyrant and a vicious, murdering, corrupt regime, you need to call yourself a king. Okay, the United States public loves kings. We think kings are great. Kings want to cut off people's heads, hey, fine. They want to cut off their arms, say that's fine. Go ahead and do it, because they're a king. They're kings. They're never corrupt. Kings, well, corruption doesn't matter for kings. But Saudi Arabia and Turkey, I think it is very important for us to talk about both Saudi Arabia and Turkey. Saudi Arabia demands that Syria change its constitution. That's one of their demands at Geneva III. And do you know what? They don't have a constitution. They don't have one. They're demanding Syria change and they don't even have a constitution. This is like a Peter Sellers movie. You know, and then you've got Turkey. And Turkey is demanding, oh, they've got to reform, they've got to reform. Now, Turkey has a very fine constitution. I read it. I've read all of these. And, but the problem is that they've got President Erdogan, who has become an absolute dictator, and everybody who supports the Constitution is either fired or in jail, or a cement truck conveniently fell on them and crushed them like a pancake. I talked with some Kurds, and they said that they were doing reporting out of Kobani, and there was a woman, I think she was American citizen, but I'm not sure what her original nationality, and she wrote a critical article about President Erdogan, and she told them, she said, I really fear for my life, and she was dead serious. And 2 days later, a cement truck fell over on her. It happens every day, right? Cement trucks are always, I mean, they fell, you know, while you were on your way here, you probably saw 2 or 3 of them fall over. And they just happened to fall over on her 2 days after and crush her to death. People die all over the place. You are not allowed to criticize the president of Turkey. It is a criminal offense. And here's what's interesting. They've just changed the law so that members of parliament no longer have diplomatic immunity. That means if the opposition criticizes President Erdogan, they go to jail. President Erdogan has said that he wants the powers of Adolf Hitler. He said it. He said, I want the powers of Adolf Hitler, and he is rapidly acquiring them. He presents the greatest immediate threat to Europe. Turkey traditionally, over 1,000 years, has attacked Europe once, over and over and over and over, and there have been great heroes who have rescued Europe from the Ottoman Turks, and he intends to do it. And I think part of this so-called Syrian refugee flood, this was a Trojan horse. If you think of the photographs that you saw, you didn't see any grandmas with little children. You didn't see any wives. You saw military-aged jihadists. And they weren't Syrians. They were from Pakistan. They were from Afghanistan. They were from all over. And they were sent there. They went to Cologne, Germany. I mean, Syrians wouldn't have done this. 1,000 Muslims in Cologne committed, we don't know how many they committed, but there were 800 complaints by German women of sexual assault. Almost one complaint of a sexual assault per immigrant. So that doesn't sound, that's not the Syria that I know and have come to love. These are barbarians recruited by Turkey for the purpose of preparing the groundwork for ultimately launching that final assault that Turkey has always wanted to capture all of Europe. They may do it. We always had a strong faith, a strong religious faith to counteract that in the past. And we don't have that, thanks in part to the EU that has diminished the role of religion and suppressed it. If they had the same freedom of religion that Syria has, they'd have the strength to resist. But anyway, it is important just in terms of a takeaway. Everybody here, when someone talks about Saudi Arabia or about Turkey, you need to tell them, well, what about this? What about the fact that Turkey or that Saudi Arabia beheaded 47 people in one day? What about the fact that they were one of the principal funders of ISIS? What about the fact that 15 of the 19 hijackers on 9/11 were Saudi Arabians? What about the fact that when the U.S. Congress, when the House, I think the House, or no, the Senate, passed JASTA, the bill that allows lawsuits against people who attacked us on 9/11, Saudi Arabia threatened to dump on the market $3 trillion in U.S. bonds and collapse the world economy. Do you think it was because they felt really innocent? I don't think so. I don't think so. So we've got to get the word out, and the word is starting to get out on Turkey and on Saudi Arabia. And you'll be surprised, when you talk to friends, neighbors, you spread the word, it has an impact. It really does. It's just casual conversations. I'm not talking about something else. But it plants a seed. You know what? That's right. It's not a king, it's a dictator. A king is a dictator by definition. And that's what, if anybody on the face of the planet is a dictator, then it's the royal family in Saudi Arabia, which is, it's basically a tribe that's given diplomatic immunity so that they can commit every conceivable act of debauchery throughout the world. I talked to a young lady, she was a stewardess on one of the flights, and it's a long flight over there and back. And she confided in me. She said, you know what? She said, we have Saudis that we pick up, and they come on, and the ladies are all dressed in black, and then they go into the ladies' room, and they come out, and they're, you know, cut down in the center, and they're wearing the flashy outfits, and they got gobs of makeup, and they're on their way to London, where there are drugs and there's alcohol and there are things that go on that we won't discuss further, out of courtesy to Father, because he would chastise me. But this is Saudi Arabia, and yet in their own country, they'll take some poor fellow who has, some little boy who has snatched a cookie, and they'll cut his hand off and cripple him for life. And then these same people who are so cruel will go off and engage in orgies in London. Corrupt, stinking place, Saudi Arabia.
So just to be fair to the people who wrote the question, we're gonna go ahead with the written questions. So the first question, in your opinion, what is the reason the U.S. wants to destroy Syria?
Well, I think we touched on that already. Is we have the two things. We've got the oil conflict, and we've got the weaponization of religion. Those are two of the things. But perhaps to take it in a more global sense, the United States the United States has this Cold War mentality towards Russia. When the Soviet Union dissolved, it was a historic opportunity for us to say, look, we have common ground with Russia on all kinds of things. Now that the Soviet Union's gone, let's work together. But whereas their intelligence apparatus simply dissolved and fell to pieces for the most part, ours, including NATO, stayed intact. Now, there was a time when NATO was a superb defensive organization. And I served under NATO during the Cold War. It served a good purpose. But when the Soviet Union disappeared, all of a sudden you had all these bureaucrats saying, oh, wait a minute, you know, my bread is buttered by hating somebody. I got to hate somebody, and if the Soviet Union's not here, I'm going to make it Russia. And so they've really turned into a very dangerous and very hostile organization, and they'll do things like, we'll run ships into the Baltic Sea right off the coast of Russia, and then when they buzz the ships with their jets to warn them off, we say, oh, that's provocative. That's provocative. Now, we don't consider it provocative that we send our ships right up to their shore. Now, I read today that Spain is allowing Russian ships to port 20 miles away from the Straits of Gibraltar. Why, NATO is all up in the arms. This is provocative. They're bringing ships off the coast of NATO-controlled countries. Well, which is it? Is it bad to send ships near the other alliance, or isn't it? You know, we want it both ways. And so what I'm saying is that there's this overarching hostility to Russia, which is not based on a clear vision of diplomatic realities. What's going on in the Ukraine? First of all, we started it. Okay, Yukhanovich, and I'm not pronouncing his name properly, but he was the pro-Russian president in Kiev, and there were people who began to demonstrate against him. The CIA and MI6 went in, converted it to an armed revolution. They began shooting and killing the people in Kiev, and they drove the president out of office. Now, here we are, we're always talking about coups. Oh, we hate coups. Well, immediately, there had not been one vote, and not one of these guys had ever gotten a vote from anybody in Ukraine. We immediately recognized them as the valid government of Ukraine. Compare that with what we did in Egypt, where we said, hey, this is a coup. Well, I got to tell you, that was an act of God. When 30 million people turn out in the streets against the Muslim Brotherhood in the largest demonstration in all of human history, that's not a coup. That is people power. And so anyway, there's a lot of craziness that goes on with the way that we deal with it. But this overarching hostility towards Russia really needs to end. We have more in common with Russia in Syria. We have everywhere. And it's insane. I think it's time, honestly, to dismantle NATO and to hold a great ceremony and to thank them for what they did in the Cold War. Give them all a medal, give them a certificate, and say, sayonara.
Have you been able to make your presentation to the Senate?
No, I have not. And I'm not sure that the Senate would be very receptive. Many of the senators are so deep, you know, they're about so deep in the cesspool themselves that it becomes very important for this to succeed for them. that's, you know, we've had similar problems with other wars that we got involved in where, you know, it became very difficult. So I would not expect that. However, now I want to say just a word of thanks to Paul Jallo, who funded my trip over to Syria on the spur of the moment. A tremendous guy. I called him on this like 3 days ahead, and I said, Paul, I said, they're saying that I ought to go in April for whatever diplomatic reasons. I said, I've got one week that I can take off. I said, can you come with me, because, you know, I don't know my way around. And this is a guy who, I mean, he distributes the gasoline in Florida, in New Jersey, and in New York. He dropped everything, cleared his calendar, came over and was side by side with me every inch of the way. He funded the, you know, because I said, look, I said, if I'm going to go for a week, I can't have jet lag for the first 4 days. So we took a, you know, usually I fly tourist class, but he funded it so we could sleep along the way, and we hit the ground running. And I mean, we just didn't stop for 1 minute while we were there. So a great word of thanks for Paul Jallo, who is a great lover of Syria.
You are an outstanding stand-up American. Is what you are doing a political suicide for you?
Well, that's a good question. I had sent the letter to President Al Assad in 2014, and then I got reelected in 2015. Now, I can't tell you that there may not come a point where I will have gone beyond the line that is bearable for them. I've already been singled out of one of 3 Americans singled out as an enemy of ISIS. They published it in their worldwide magazine, Dabiq. They gave me the biggest coverage. I felt a little bit honored by that. They called me the American Crusader, and but they quoted, and in essence, the part where I said, if Damascus falls, the black and white flag of Al-Qaeda will fly. I said, Lebanon will fall, Jordan will fall, and I said, from there will be a drive on Europe. And the way that they presented it in their magazine, which is very glossy and fancy, I was surprised when I saw it, basically, it was entitled In the Words of the Enemy. And they gave the greatest exposure to me, and then on the reverse side, there was a picture of a big, hairy jihadist assassin. So I guess there was a message there. I don't know how far I can go, but frankly, I see Syria as much bigger. In the War College, there was a term used, it was called the center of gravity. And in wars, the center of gravity is that thing which determines the outcome of the war. Sometimes it's the capture of a capital or whatever. But in the war on terror, to me, the outcome of what happens in Syria is the center of gravity which will determine whether we win or lose the war on terror across the world.
Is there any plans to convince more U.S. politicians to make similar visits to see the situation firsthand?
The answer to that is yes. There are plans, there are things that we're working on. Paul Jallo is doing enormously good work, and we are hoping that after we get through the November elections, we can see some good things happen. I'd like to just comment on somebody that I see as a real hero. When I was trying to stop the U.S. from attacking Syria, I did a number of things. I wrote letters to every member of the House of Representatives. I wrote a separate letter to every member of the Senate. And I called Eric Cantor, who was the Republican majority leader. He and I had served together for years. And we had a heated conversation that went on for about half an hour. And finally he was exasperated, and he said, Dick, he said, what can we do to get you on board? And I said, Father, I won't repeat precisely what I said, but I said with great emphasis, and I very seldom use profanity, but with great emphasis I said, stay out of Syria. And so fortunately, I think there were a lot of us. I know the Schiller Institute was intensely active during that time, and we managed to overcome the administration's desire to go into Syria and to save Syria from an overt attack by the United States, Britain, and France, which was hopefully the decisive turning point in the war. Oh, and just one other thing. I wanted to mention, I've told you about Paul Jallow. Tulsi Gabbard is a Democrat. Some of you know her well. Well, when I wrote to all of the members of the House, they would send back letters, and most of them were saying, oh, well, you know, the administration says he's a bad guy, blah, 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 you know, stupid stuff. I got a letter from Tulsi Gabbard, and it showed exquisite insight into what was going on in Syria. I've never done this before. In thousands of letters that I've written, and I've been, you know, a top administrator in the Pentagon and so forth, I actually wrote a letter commending her on her letter to me, her response to me. I've never done that before out of thousands and thousands of letters. This woman she is courageous. She understands. And the background on her, which is very interesting, is that early on she was flown to Israel and to Jordan, and she was given the typical indoctrination about bad guys and gas attacks and all this stuff, and she believed it. And Paul Jallow went and talked to her and explained everything to her. And when she was informed and really understood, she totally flipped. Totally flipped. And this was like the #2 official in the Democratic hierarchy. And she totally flipped onto the Syrian side. And she has become even, much more knowledgeable over time. And so we are hoping to get her, and we're hoping to get a number of other congressional people to go. And who knows? I may go if we get a delegation to go. But we're hoping for that.
Based on your visit and your experience, what do you think Syrian Americans can do to help Syria?
Well, again, it's going to depend. It's going to depend on what your personal abilities are. Everybody in here has a circle of friends, and I'm not talking about just within the Syrian community, but outside of the Syrian community. You can talk about Saudi Arabia and Turkey. We need to undermine the link between the United States and those. We can talk to political figures, and right here in Boston, up in this area. Go out and speak to your congressman. I will tell you that if a group of 3 or 4 people, it doesn't take a mob of people, but if a group of 3 or 4 people say, look, we would like to come and talk to you about Syria, typically somebody will talk to you. Maybe it'll be the chief of staff, maybe it'll be the congressman, congresswoman, but you'll get a chance to talk. And just go in and just explain what's going on. Take something that will sort of be vivid. And I've got an article I'm putting out soon on in response to the 51 people. I've got another one that it's actually a letter that I was about to send out about the massacre at Al-Zara by Arar al-Sham. Arar al-Sham took over a small, quiet, peaceful Alawite village, and they slaughtered everyone. And they actually, they love to take pictures. Isn't it amazing? If you try to look up pictures of Saudi Arabian soldiers butchering people, burning people, beheading people, you can't find them. But I guarantee you, if you made an effort and you had the time, you could find 1,000 atrocities committed by U.S. allies where they put it on YouTube and they publish it. Because it's part of terror. And terror is part of the technique. That's what they're trying to accomplish. So, but anyway, I would say, focus on something. And, and I've got some things that perhaps I could send on that, where you could use it as kind of a talking point. And just go through and, within this area, typically your Congress people, they like to talk to people who are constituents. But anyway, do that type of thing. Just go get a group of people who are reasonably articulate and go in and sit down and talk to them. And just, talk to them about Saudi Arabia and Turkey. How are these people? How do we have an ally who says he wants the powers of Adolf Hitler? How do we have an ally that beheads 47 people in a single day because some of them have spoken out against him? What kind of allies are these? And just begin to plant seeds of doubt. This is the thing. And then remind them there are a whole lot of Saudis who are watching what you're doing. And when they make a move, when they do something, then you report it. Report it. So that's my thought.
This one in Arabic, I'm going to translate it in a second. متى الحكومة الأمريكية تحس بقيمة الإنسان وتوقف دعم الإرهاب? When is the American government is going to feel the value of a human life and stop supporting terrorism?
It's a good question. Very good question. It frustrates me. We're constantly critical of Syria. We say, oh, they use barrel bombs. You know what a barrel bomb is? It's a barrel filled with explosives and shrapnel. Do you think that that's as deadly as a Tomahawk missile? You remember shock and awe in Iraq? Can you imagine how many people died? It's estimated that 1 million people died during the war that we waged in Iraq. Somehow, when we do it, it doesn't matter. When we attacked Libya, we bombed everything in sight. We didn't care what it was. We didn't care who got killed. But all of a sudden, it's the Syrians. They've got to be ultra careful about everything. Well, let me tell you this. It is interesting. If you look at the casualty figures from the Syrian war, it's estimated by people on all sides that about 20% of the casualties are civilians. You know what it was in Vietnam when I fought? 80%. 4 times as many in Vietnam per capita. I mean, per capita as it is in Syria. Frankly, I don't know how they managed to keep the casualties among civilians as low as they do. And that may be part of the reason that some people are a little bit critical of Bashar Al Assad for being not hard enough, not brutal enough in the war. But they have done a tremendous job of protecting the civilians, contrary to what you hear. And just remember that one figure. 80% in Vietnam, civilian deaths, 20% in Syria. It's pretty darn good. Pretty darn good. Because the rebels always choose to fight where there are civilians who can be hurt, and they will not release the civilians to flee. A lot of times they behead them, they kill them if they flee. And you got to fight a war. I mean, that's just the way. You look at when we made the final assault on Berlin. Do you think we gave a whit about civilians, about the women and the children who were killed? There were so many people killed that nobody kept count. They flooded. There were civilians who had fled into the underground, into the metro in Berlin to escape the fighting, all civilians. They opened up the water main and they drowned 50,000 people. You'll never read about it, but it happened. In Dresden, Churchill had a plan. Dresden was a demilitarized city. They did not have a single soldier, single weapon, single instrument of defense or anything, and they had publicized this is an open city. It was all women and children, elderly people. Churchill, with our assistance, launched a firebomb attack. They ringed the city with firebombs and burned it towards the center. They found people who had fled into the water tanks, who were boiled alive in the water tanks. 50,000 German civilians, known civilians, not one soldier in Dresden. And here we are complaining about Syria. I mean, give me a break. I mean, I've been in battle on our side, and I have no doubt I dropped bombs, and the enemy chose to fight in populated areas, and I will guarantee you that I have killed civilians. I have no interest and had no desire to kill any civilian, but you have to fight. The enemy are fighting you. You've got a battle going and people get hurt. And this is what's happening in Syria. That's all that's happening. It's just, we need to end the war if we want to stop civilians from being killed.
Can we expect that American policy would change after the election of a new president?
It depends on who's elected president. It really does. I honestly do believe the State Department and CIA are like a government unto themselves. The neocons are like a government to themselves. If you look at the people like Bill Kristol, who is part of the whole war mechanism, George Will, who's a neocon, they've resigned from the Republican Party because they won't have any part of Donald Trump. I don't think it's because of Donald Trump's moral background or that type of thing. I think that it is because of war and because there are people who are able to do a tremendous amount of war profiteering. I do believe that the election can make a dramatic difference, and I'm not, believe me, I actually was helping out Cruz because I wanted to move him towards the Syrian point of view. And I was the state chairman for him and when I talked with him, I asked a question that went on at great length and was very educational. And it had such an impact that he actually changed his website to where he said on it, I do not favor toppling Syria. So, you know, everything that I'm doing, I really don't care about politics. I want to see an end to the war, and so if I didn't know who was going to win. Is it going to be Trump? Is it going to be Cruz? But if it was Cruz, I wanted to move him in the Syrian direction. Trump, from everything that I can see, is already very pro-Syrian, and so I think if he is elected, I think we stand a very good chance. And this is not a pitch for him, and it's not a partisan thing, but I'm going to tell you, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders was fairly decent. Bernie Sanders, he was good on Syria. And also there is a Green Party candidate, Jill Stein. Jill Stein is superb on Syria, but in terms of who can be elected, I think Trump is probably the best chance that we have, and I honestly do believe, because he's been, he waffles on all kinds of things. But the one thing he hasn't waffled on is on Syria. And he's been consistent. And so it tells me that there are people who are advising him who feel strongly about this and who know what's going on. So I think we have a chance after the elections.
Do you see any hope in stopping this war against the Syrian government?
I do, and and of course this ties into what I just said, but I think we're making progress. I think if you go back to 2013, there was a solid wall against Syria. We began to break that solid wall with the letter that I sent in 2014. The word is getting out. Now, and many thanks to the Schiller Institute, they've gotten out a lot of word about the 23 pages that were censored by George Bush that laid out the Saudi Arabian involvement in the 9/11 attacks on the Twin Towers and the Pentagon. This is important. This is important. And there's a roll on to begin. Let's get the word out. So anyway, with that, I want to thank you very much for your patience. I had no intention of keeping you nearly so long, but I hope that I've given you some information that will arm you to answer questions when you receive criticism about Syria. And I am hoping that that over the next year or so, as things unfold with the Brexit, with the election, that we will see a move towards peace in Syria. It's time, and I will do everything humanly possible to make it happen. God bless you all, and thank you very much.